And welcome in to the Saturday edition of the Fun Astrology Podcast, where we read the free weekly column with MMAcycles.com author and financial analyst since about 50-plus years ago, Ray Merriman, taking a look at the economy and the astrology and the financial markets all together. Thanks so much for joining us. We always begin with a couple of news articles. This first one is from Friday, CNBC.com. Stocks jumped sharply Friday after a softer-than-expected April jobs report boosted hopes that the Federal Reserve could start cutting interest rates soon. Friday's non-farm payrolls report showed 175,000 jobs gained in April. That's below the 240,000 jobs expected by economists surveyed by Dow Jones. The unemployment rate edged up to 3.9% versus 3.8% the prior month, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Wage figures also came in less than expected, an encouraging sign for inflation. Then, an article from the Wall Street Journal editorial board on Wednesday. The Federal Open Market Committee maintained its interest rate target for Fed funds at 5.25% to 5.5%. This has been signaled after the inflation report for March, which came in hot at an annual 3.5% rate. But Mr. Powell said that current monetary policy is restrictive enough to bring down prices, and he took a rate increase off the table. It's unlikely that the next policy rate move will be a hike, he said. Now Ray's commentary for this week. The Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of Saturday, April 20th is turning out to be an important turning point for many global stock indices. Several have rallied sharply since their multi-week lows of Friday, April 19th, and some have even risen to new all-time highs. Others, however, are still struggling to gain traction. In Asia and the Pacific Rim, strong rallies were noted in China, Hong Kong, and India. China's Shanghai Composite, the SSE, soared to a new yearly high, supporting our view that a new 5.5-year cycle is now underway. The Hang Seng of Hong Kong also rallied to its highest level since September 2023. And in India, the Nifty Index soared to a new all-time high on Friday. However, both Australia's ASX and Japan's Nikkei were more subdued but held above their Jupiter-Uranus lows of April 19th. The divergence was just as apparent in Europe, where the London FTSE soared to a new all-time high on Friday, but the German DAX and Zurich SMI were much weaker, yet held their lows of April 19th. The Netherlands AEX, however, was robust and ended the week testing its all-time high. U.S. stock indices also held their lows of April 17th to 19th and rallied sharply into Friday, May 3rd, but not to new all-time highs. Not yet. Brazil's Bovespa also had a good week, but still remains well off its all-time highs. The key takeaway is that markets reversed off primary cycle lows associated with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, the longest-term planetary aspect of the year. Once again, this demonstrates the power of geocosmic studies as an exceptional market timing tool. In other markets, Bitcoin and Ethereum dropped to possible major or half-primary cycle lows on Wednesday, May 1st. Then they rallied sharply into Friday, with Bitcoin reversing from a low of 56,483 to a high so far of 62,191. An appreciation of over 10%. The low was into the time band and price range given in a second special report issued to our subscribers on May 1st, but still not enough to confirm the low is yet in. The decline into last week's low from the all-time high of 73,803 on March 14th was 23.46% and touched our critical 116-day moving average, something we like to see when primary or half-primary cycle lows form. Gold, silver, and crude oil were not so fortunate. Each made multi-week, 4-week or greater, lows. But note that crude oil is now in its time band for its primary cycle trough and entering the lower line of a downward channel formation, for chartists like us, who watch for these things. For students of geocosmic studies, we also note that Saturn is now in the middle of Pisces. We look for a long-term cycle low in crude oil with Saturn in Pisces. The middle is a good place for a longer-term or primary cycle low to form. Also, Mars, the planet associated with conflicts and war, entered Aries last week, the sign ruled by Mars. Geopolitical conflicts may erupt into violence again if leaders act on impulse instead of patience, which could interrupt deliveries of crude oil supplies once again this month. We're already seeing this with protesters on college campuses across the nation who reportedly consist mainly of non-students of those institutions, yet forcing school officials to close down classes or bring in police and National Guard units to restore order and protect those who are actually there to get an education. Now, the short-term geocosmics and longer-term thoughts. An article from Saturday's Wall Street Journal written by Peggy Noonan. The demonstrations, which sometimes became riots, clarified some things maybe for the first time in generations. America is a country of First Amendment rights, whether the students love our Constitution or not. It's a nation that supports the right to gather and protest. It respects the right to yell and write and put out the truth as you see it. It understands and accepts peaceful demonstrations, but it doesn't respect breaking our laws. It doesn't support violence as a tool or tactic and will move against it. It isn't bad to reestablish these baseline principles. And now Ray's thoughts. He says last week's column discussed the passive-aggressive tendencies of Mars conjunct Neptune in Pisces, which was in effect early last week. The column stated, quoting, "The next day, April 30th, Mars enters Aries. Now the threat has bite, for Mars is home in its ruling sign of Aries. The only problem is that it may act and react impulsively, causing more mayhem than necessary and hurting support for its cause." End quote. The threats are indeed turning from barks into bites, as the passivity and patience of university leaders has reached a turning point regarding the dilemma to support free speech versus hate speech, intimidation, and occupation, i.e. trespassing, of college buildings that prevents students from attending classes and advancing toward careers. So much for passivity, Neptune and Pisces, now that Mars, of action, has moved into Aries, of more physical combat between opposing sides, like protesters and security personnel, and possibly Hamas, Iran, and Israel, as well as Russia versus Ukraine, and any other parties that are seen as, quote, being in the way. Mars in Aries is likely to act more assertively than Mars in Pisces, so no more Mr. Nice Guy. This is all occurring within the larger flip-the-script cosmic narrative that started when both the Sun and Pluto ingressed into Aquarius January 20th, 2024. This was further supported by the recent Mercury retrograde cycle of April 1st through 25th. There's been a lack of clarity related to the flip-flopping of the narratives, socially and politically. But it is also observable in the world of economics and financial markets, where narratives are changing and markets are suddenly reversing, right along with the timings of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, April 20th, but whose orb of influence will continue into mid-May. The biggest economic reversal of narratives is unfolding precisely in accordance with our recent webinars regarding the Federal Reserve and the belief that, first, interest rates would be cut, then they wouldn't, and now after Friday's jobs report and the prior week's weaker-than-expected GSP numbers, the narrative is again switching to the idea of Fed rate cuts. This fits so well with Mercury the trickster's nature, combined with 1. Hard Saturn aspects to the Fed's chart in April, the Fed's birth date being December 23, 1913, 2. Followed by soft Jupiter transits starting now, as we, 3, head into the exit of Mercury retrograde's shadow on May 11th. Then it's back to the future, or back to themes present in the first 3 months of the year, before April, before Mercury turned retrograde. We're also coming out of the Venus square Pluto on May 1st and Pluto turning retrograde May 2nd. Pluto relates to debt, and there's a lot of concern coming out about the non-sustainability of the U.S. debt trend. The next big reversal period will be May 13th through 18th, when the Sun and Venus will conjoin Uranus and Jupiter. That combination has a lot of correspondence with financial markets and will likely either reverse this new trend or propel a breakout to new highs or lows, depending on which markets are near their yearly highs or lows around that time. It will also be just in time for our May 18th annual webinar on the mid-year financial market update, which is listed in the announcements of the newsletter on the website. We will also have a lot to talk about then. Maybe more clarity will be visible by then as to whether equities, cryptos, energy, and metals are still in bull markets or have begun new bear markets. It's a time of surprises, maybe even shocks. It can be very exciting for those who are on the right side of potentially large price movements, which are indicated by these signatures. And that concludes this week's newsletter. Can you tell that that was written by a Capricorn? Great and very thorough, and it covered everything. That's what you need to know going forward. There are a lot of announcements in the newsletter. You can catch all of those at MMAcycles.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you again next Saturday with this MMAcycles.com weekly update.